On a stormy night, I watched on a security camera as my father shoved my elderly grandfather out into the freezing rain. He passed away weeks later, but he left me a secret, a hidden diary detailing months of abuse and the multi-million-dollar contract my parents had betrayed. They thought they had gotten away with it, but they never expected me to use his last words as a weapon against them. That night, a storm tore through the city's sky. In the flickering light of the security camera, I saw my father, Mark Ellison, fling open the back door and coldly shove my grandfather out onto the porch. My grandfather trembled in his old coat, rain lashing his silver hair, his frail frame swaying. My mother stood there, silent, letting the man who had given them everything shiver in the cold wind. I watched the scene unfold on the screen, frozen. And in that moment, I knew my family had lost the most precious thing, their humanity. A few weeks later, my grandfather passed away in my arms. But as I sorted through his belongings, I discovered an old diary and a contract he had kept hidden. In them, he had documented months of deception and left me a final wish I never could have anticipated. My name is Caleb Ellison. I'm 25 years old, living and working in Billings, Montana. To the locals, I'm just an ordinary Uber driver, but my heart has always belonged an hour away in Sheridan County, Wyoming, at the family ranch where my grandfather, Warren Ellison, lived. That ranch was my entire world, hundreds of acres steeped in the sweat and love of generations. My grandfather taught me everything there: how to milk cows, fix fences, and most importantly, how to live with integrity. Land isn't just something to own, Caleb, he'd say in his warm, steady voice. It's something to preserve. At 78, he was a rugged, weathered man, but full of compassion. After my grandmother passed away 6 years ago, he grew lonelier, but I visited often, listening to his stories and helping with chores. He was my anchor, the man who taught me that honor and family were worth more than money. Not everyone in the family shared his values. My father, Mark, despised the ranching life he'd grown up in. He moved to Billings and opened a small restaurant that was now drowning in debt. He was ambitious but selfish, valuing flashy cars and expensive clothes over the legacy he'd been born into. If the old man would just sell that ranch, I once overheard him tell my mother, we'd be living in a big city by now. To him, my grandfather wasn't a father but an obstacle. My mother, Elaine, was swept up in my father's ambitions. She wasn't cruel, but she saw my grandfather as a burden. Recently, my parents' visits to the ranch became more frequent, their purpose thinly veiled. "Dad, you've worked your whole life," my father would say, his voice smooth as a salesman's. "It's time to rest. Sell the ranch, move to the city with us. We'll take care of you." My mother would chime in, her voice dripping with feigned concern about his health and safety. My grandfather resisted. "This land is our story," he'd say, his voice firm but weary. "Selling it would be like selling our family's honor." But I saw him wavering. He was strong, but lonely. My parents exploited that loneliness, using me as a pawn in their narrative. "Don't you want to be close to Caleb?" they'd ask. I hated how they dragged me into it, but I felt powerless. One evening, after months of relentless pressure, my grandfather surrendered. "Maybe it's time to let go," he told me on the porch, his voice tired. I wanted to scream that they were untrustworthy, but I saw the exhaustion in his eyes. He sold the ranch. The $3.5 million went directly into my father's account. "Look after me until the end, like you promised," was my grandfather's only request. "Of course, Dad," my father replied, flashing a smile I knew was fake. As we left the ranch for the last time, an unease swelled inside me like an approaching storm. My parents bought a lavish 3-story house in an upscale Billings neighborhood. At first, they played the part of devoted children. My grandfather was given a clean room on the 2nd floor, and my father would boast to the neighbors about how well they were caring for him. But beneath the facade, small cracks began to appear. I first noticed it when my grandfather, his hands trembling with age, spilled a glass of water. "Dad, you're too clumsy to do anything," my mother snapped, her voice sharp with irritation. The insults grew more frequent, the neglect more obvious. His room became a storage space, piled high with boxes. His meals were often just a bowl of cold soup, while my parents ate lavishly in the dining room. I started monitoring the household through the security cameras I had installed for them years ago, my heart aching each time I saw him sitting alone, his eyes filled with a quiet sadness. One night, I confronted my father. "You promised to take care of him," I said, my voice shaking with anger. He just looked at me, his eyes cold as ice. "I don't owe anyone anything," he said. He gave me the money himself. Then came the storm. It was a cold, raging night in Billings. I couldn't sleep, the unease about my grandfather a physical weight in my chest. I opened the security camera app on my phone. The image from the kitchen loaded and my heart stopped. My grandfather sat hunched in a chair, his trembling hands struggling to hold a spoon. My father stood over him, his face red with rage after my grandfather accidentally dropped his soup bowl. "Can't you do anything carefully?" he roared. I watched, frozen in horror, as my father grabbed my grandfather's frail arm and dragged him toward the back of the house. He flung open the door to the pouring rain and shoved him out onto the porch. My grandfather stumbled, his thin coat no match for the wind and cold. My mother appeared in the frame, watching from a distance, her face a mask of cold indifference. Then my father slammed the door shut, leaving the man who gave him everything to tremble in the storm. I didn't think. I grabbed my keys and rushed out into the night, my truck speeding through the slick streets. I found him huddled under a tree, soaked and freezing. "Grandpa," I shouted, running to him and dropping to my knees. "Caleb," he whispered, his voice faint. I wrapped him in a blanket from my truck and took him to my small apartment. He was so weak, so fragile. I put him in my only bed and slept on the floor, listening to his faint, shallow breathing. The next morning, I returned to my parents' house to collect his things. "You had the nerve to take him," my father roared. "I'm not letting him stay here to be abused." I shot back, grabbing his belongings and leaving without another word. In the days that followed, I cared for him, working extra Uber shifts to afford his medicine. My tiny apartment became our sanctuary. We talked for hours, just like we used to on the ranch. But the night in the storm had taken its toll. He grew weaker. A week later, he woke me one night, clutching his chest, gasping for breath. At the hospital, the doctor's words were a death sentence. "He's very weak, Caleb. Prepare yourself. He may not make it through the next few weeks." I stayed by his side day and night. One morning, I woke to find him lying still, his face peaceful. He was gone. The pain was immense, but in it, a small flame ignited. His story was not over. My parents arranged a grand funeral, the hypocrisy a bitter pill to swallow. My father gave a flowery eulogy about a respected man who passed peacefully, surrounded by family. I stood in the corner, my fists clenched, but I held my tongue. Justice, my grandfather taught me, doesn't need to be loud. Back in my apartment, while sorting through his things, I found a small, worn suitcase. Inside was a sealed envelope with my name on it. "My dearest Caleb," his shaky handwriting began, "by the time you read this, I may no longer be here. Justice may come late, but it will come if you don't give up. In this suitcase, I've left everything I have. Not money, but the truth. Use it to reclaim our family's honor." Beneath the letter was a folder. It contained his diary, documenting every insult and moment of neglect he suffered in my parents' house. And behind it, the contract for the ranch sale, with the clause clearly stating my father's obligation to care for him. This was his final wish, his trust in me to do what was right. I hired a lawyer, Raymond Carter. "You have a very strong case," he said, after reviewing the evidence, the diary, the contract, and the security footage from that stormy night. "They didn't just mistreat your grandfather. They breached a contract. The day the summons was delivered, my parents showed up at my door. "You dare sue your own parents?" my father roared. "I want justice for Grandpa," I replied, my voice steady. The trial was a battle. My parents' lawyer painted me as an ungrateful son, and them as loving children who had a momentary lapse in judgment. But the evidence was irrefutable. Raymond read from the diary. He played the video of that night. The courtroom was silent, horrified. The judge's verdict was swift and uncompromising. The ranch sale contract was declared void due to coercion and exploitation. All funds and assets from the sale were to revert to my grandfather's estate. And as the one who cared for him in his final days, I was named the sole rightful heir. My parents sat stunned, their faces pale. Justice had finally spoken. The repercussions for them were severe. They had to repay the $3.5 million plus damages. My father's restaurant collapsed. Their carefully constructed reputation in Billings was shattered. I didn't use the inheritance for myself. I established the Warren Ellison Foundation, a fund to support abused elderly people. I bought back a small piece of land in Wyoming, built a simple log cabin, and erected a memorial stone for my grandfather. On it, I inscribed the words he taught me. True value lies not in land or money, but in how we treat family. The lawsuit didn't bring him back, but it restored his honor. And in doing so, I found my own path. I didn't return to the ranch to live, but I visit often. Standing there, I feel my grandfather's presence, not as a memory of pain, but as a legacy of kindness, resilience, and love. I kept my promise.